morning, good afternoon, good evening, and a huge warm welcome back to what is going to be a brilliant Kev Baker show right here on Truth Frequency Radio. And we're coming to you from a live and very, very cold Glasgow, Scotland here, okay? Now, I admit it is not half as cold as what I'm seeing over in places like Chicago, other areas in the US, Canada as well. And the polar vortex that I sometimes make fun of because it's so overhyped in the media definitely seems to be playing its role this time. It is wreaking havoc on some areas of the planet. And I'm sure that's something we'll get into as tonight's show goes on as well. And before we get into tonight's show, let me just remind people that the Kev Baker show is actually sponsored by... I'll just get the right camera there for recording. We're also recording this for YouTube, so just so people know, I know the radio audience can't appreciate this. So we are sponsored by getthetea.com. Now then, we're doing a special offer for everyone out there right now if you are in the US, because if you use coupon code KBS at the checkout, and I still can't believe I'm kind of saying that, almost makes you sound like a real radio show host, right? I say that tongue-in-cheek. But please, please, please go on over there and check out getthetea.com. You'll be helping me out greatly. You'll obviously be helping Get the Tea out. But most importantly, you'll be helping yourself too. So with that out of the way, and with wasting no more time whatsoever, what a show I have got lined up for all of you tonight. And for any first-time listeners out there who have not heard tonight's guest before, you are in for an absolute rare treat. Sit down, buckle up, and get ready to have your mind blown. That is right, because tonight I am on with Dr. Richard Alan Miller. And Dr. Richard Alan Miller has a long and extensive resume in the fields of physics, metaphysics, and agriculture. Here are just some of the highlights from his very rich and varied resume. From solid-state physics, you know I like the sound of that, and to states of consciousness and much in between. Absolutely. You see, this sets it all up, and wait till I get into a bit of this. Prodigious from an early age, two of Rick Miller's high school science projects were adopted by NASA, including one in the Mariner 4 mission to determine the amount of water on planet Mars. At age 16, he built a linear accelerator and hydrogen bubble chamber for a science fair project that was the first American to demonstrate particles going faster than the speed of light. He has been involved in various research and projects, many at the top secret level, and that have formed the basis of several modern-day scientific inventions. Now, Rick Miller's research in the field of paranormal began as a graduate physicist working 11 years with Navy Intel. And it goes on, because his work includes foundational papers on a holographic concept of reality and embryonic holography, and work with microwaves and synthetic telepathy. Now, he was used as Timothy Leary's experiment guinea pig to see what the effects of LSD were taken by a Mensa-level genius. Oh, to have been that guinea pig, I say. Now, Dr. Miller was a real-life character in the X-Files' Fox Mulder, which was based on and investigating unexplained phenomena for Navy SEAL Corps and MRU, which put him in the path of many incredible life experiences, including an encounter with an alien and travel to an underground Antarctic Nazi base. And I remember learning about that the first time on Freaky Friday. It was awesome. He conducted ESP experiments with astronaut Edgar Mitchell, no less, on the dark side of the moon, or as I prefer to call it, the far side of the moon. And he developed early protocols and trained Navy SEALs in ESP and super soldier techniques. And last but not least, as an agriculturalist, he is a recognized expert in the growing and marketing of crops and herbals, and has invented ingenious and effective farm machinery specific to the type of crops to be harvested and had input into production of some of the largest crop producers in the world. So with all of that out of the way, and I have teased you long enough out there, here he is, the man himself, Dr. Rick Miller. Welcome back, man.
I love your accent. It's very disarming in those eyes. Look at that. Kidder.
You're far too kind, Doc. You are far too kind. But that resume there, that bio, that is absolutely ticking all of the boxes that myself and the audience.
That's not what I'm doing now.
I know.
Don't tell.
I was going to say that isn't even half of it, Doc. It's not even half of it. But I was listening to you recently, and I want to dive straight into this, and we'll have lots of time for fun and laughs along the way. But a more serious note to start off with, and that is the recent fires over in California and the aftermath of which. And I know this is something that you talk about right now, and something that we must all be aware of, right? So talk to us about what's going on there.
Yeah, smart meters are an endgame weapon, and they're now showing true colors everywhere. The Paradise Fire, that so-called blue laser, particle beam weapons. No, actually, what happened was the smart meters are unstable, and they went ballistic and took out several thousand people. They killed them. All those missing people in Paradise are probably charcoal, because the fires were so hot. The blue lights that they saw leaping was one smart meter causing the next one to go unstable. And we have talked about these kinds of things with nuclear winters, where we were not allowed to explode nuclear warheads in the atmosphere for fear of creating a firestorm. And that's what happened essentially with 5G and the 5G meters. And as a result, PG&E, as of last week, is specific individuals are going on trial for murder. And they have now outlawed smart meters in a bunch of cities. In Oregon here, it was Cotati and several others down in Northern California, where they are now plain illegal, like Curry County here in Oregon. Basically, in the next 2 years, smart meters are going to be shown to be toxic. We've already known that intrinsically when you have unshielded radiation, ionizing radiation at these bandwidths, there's dosimetry, and dosimetry creates an LD50 ratio, lethal dose 50. And we are verging on these kinds of things because of the convenience of wanting to charge our cell phones on the fly. It's crazy. And I've been advocating against these things. I don't even carry a smartphone. They're toxic as well. That's the 2 and 3G technologies. These conveniences for storage of information and so on is nothing compared to the new computers that we're developing that are 1,000,000 times more efficient using water. And so the actual memory storage capacity in water is probably 6 zeros more efficient than gallium and arsenic, forming a forbidden zone. So that it was a nice fly, and what's going to happen next is they'll force them on you, and then they'll have to recall them, or they double tax you. That's how it's going to be.
This is basically what I was going to say to you, because in Scotland next year, it's going to be mandatory. It's compulsory that we move to the smart meter system. And in Glasgow, where I am, we're actually
they don't make those compulsive. You can opt out, and they're trying to make them expensive for opting out. Here, they were going to charge you $36 a month to have a driver drive up your driveway to read your meter. That has already been waived here in Josephine County. If Scotland is trying to play the end game on you, that's simply so that by next year, when they're outlawed, they now have a way to charge you a second time to get rid of them.
Absolutely. And where I am in Glasgow, in Scotland, this is the UK's first smart city. So I am, unfortunately and conveniently for the show, at ground zero for the smart city. Now, that's full immersion in 5G, Internet of Things. And how would you describe that with your knowledge to the listeners out there?
Well, every bandwidth of frequencies have dosimetry in the body. When I was in anesthesiology, we created a thing called a aortic catheter that did cardiac output. And what I did is I built this catheter that had a 10 megahertz crystal Doppler transducer, so it would send a signal out and reflect back, and I knew blood velocity. And then the aortic wall, we go in through the femoral artery down by the knee and push it up into the aortic arch, and it'd sit there and look around. And I put 8 crystals around it at 28 megahertz because the aortic wall was opaque at 28 megahertz. That means it reflected that signal, and I got a pulse echo of the aortic cross-section at any given moment times blood velocity, which is called cardiac output. That's the most important measurement in medicine. And that demonstrates that blood is opaque at 10 megahertz, whereas the aortic wall was at 28 megahertz. Dr. Beal in Florida, B-E-A-L, Dr. Beal, has done a number of studies on the absorption coefficient on different organs. In the 0.3 to 3 gigahertz, it's the temporal lobes. And why we studied that was basically, my other computers are making lots of noises. When Alan Frey at Willow Grove discovered man had another sensory motor input, and I experienced it when I was at level 8 at Broom Lake meeting krill, I could not understand how this entity could talk to me inside my head. I could hear voices. How does that work? Didn't go through the auditory system, so how did that work? What's happening is this is now called synthetic telepathy, and basically came out of Alan Frey and my work in the early 70s, where we essentially could put a voice anywhere we wanted, including outer space. It's 0.3 to 3 gigahertz is microwave band, and what it does is it causes the temporal lobes to heat and begin to ring. And when they ring, you heterodyne audio onto that, and you can hear it in your head.
So is this what they would describe as a voice to skull, voice of God technology?
That's the current, they call it voice to skull technology today. But that was in the 1970s. And so then, today, that's our leading ordinance that we used before any bomb is dropped, before any jet goes in with 50 caliber cannon, whatever, in ordnance. The first ordinance is Commander Solo. Look it up. It's a single aircraft that uses synthetic telepathy to discourage war. And the first Bush, when they invaded Iraq, remember when there was like 1 or 2 GIs standing outside a hall and they had a big pile of weapons as all the Iraqi were coming out of these caves surrendering? That's synthetic telepathy.
Just to give you my kind of input on that, when I was in the army, it was in between Gulf War I and II, and the experience of the guys that had been over there for Gulf War I, that is exactly what they were telling me. They were saying they were going in ready for a fight, and when they got there, most of the time there was nobody left to fight, and the rest of the time the Iraqi soldiers were walking towards them. Just weren't interested. So,
right. This is it now. Synthetic telepathy is simply a sound, which means if you hear it in your head, you can distinguish your own thought from that unless it's subliminal. And when I said subliminal, loudness content, where it's whispering to you very silently like this while you're thinking your own thoughts. And at that point, can often fool you like Legermain hypnosis, sleight of hand. It's a type of hypnosis where you focus on my voice to the exclusion of other things, and at some point you become Son of Sam. And you hear voices in your head, and they affect you, and especially if they're quoting Torah and scripture. So you can manipulate somebody by doing this. Now, the other side of that is the slightly different bandwidth. And the point, instead of 0.3 to 3 gigahertz, you might use about 4 gigahertz. Now what you're doing is heating up the amalgam in your teeth, and that's used for crowd dispersal because of the heat and the pain that occurs, like teeth starting to heat up in a microwave oven. And so that's what they used on Branch Davidian to break up that nonsense. Now, that is, today they have these horns on NRAPs that are just, we're talking about serious damage microwave band. Now, and I said Dr. Beal has a whole series of studies showing where it's damaging the heart, damaging brain cells, damaging collagen or some other chemistries, ATP, can disrupt it. These are all the different bandwidths have the symmetry and are toxic. That's why we have an atmosphere to protect us from that kind of crap from outer space. And to bring it down here on Earth for convenience is sort of like bringing a nuclear reactor next door to your house as a little portable nuclear reactor so you can have your own radioactive waste dump. That's crazy. The technologies are, it's about making money. It's a shame.
That seems to be all that it's about. That's the bottom line in the end of the day. It's greed. And it used to be...
greed is good according to Gecko.
Yeah, I used to say that we were living in an invisible prison, Doc, but really we're now going to be entering an invisible microwave scenario.
That's the new technology direction that I'm quite concerned on. The space fence that Lockheed just got that big... I sent you a series of links that you can post if you'd like on the space fence. It's a scary technology, and right now Russia is, warning or requesting the United States don't put weapons in space. What's war good for? It's a bunch of old men sending young men to war to die, so there's more money to go around for the old men. It's crazy.
You see, and, I also see the weaponization of space. It's more money for the military-industrial complex.
You could just as easily find stars that are solid diamonds. There's all kinds of things that we can make money on out there. And that's the problem. Every new technology has a double-edged sword to it. And it cuts both ways. And, like nuclear energy is good for medicine, but it's also a war deterrent. Which one do you use it for? Well, as man is, the first thing he's going to do is weaponize it. Before he does anything else, he's going to weaponize it. And 5G meter, I can tell you back early on, the prisons, our prisons in America were rampant with opiates and opiate addiction. And what happened over the last 10 years, there were studies where they moved the opiate addiction to antipsychotics. That is now the primary problem with prisons is no longer opiates, but antipsychotics. And that was beta test 1. The second beta test were when they gave them to our children and found that 1 out of 5 children on antipsychotics is unstable. And so if you'll notice in all the high school shootings, before CNN and Fox get in 2 and 3 hours later to do the spin, the early reportings of any of the shootings, in all cases, the kid's on an antipsychotic. He's already proven unstable. There's a second shooter. They'll say, oh, yeah, I heard some shots over there as well. Double shots, 2 shooters. That individual is what's called a handler that hits the unstable person with scopolamine. And that was the beta testing they did on our children, because how many people are on antipsychotics in your neighborhood? And if you have a smart meter on your house, imagine just how easy it would be to deliver, search and destroy, turning you into a zombie like they did this kid. In every case, that kid hears a voice in his head suggesting. And so it's like when Merlin told Arthur, anything not specifically forbidden is mandatory. If it's possible, you can count on it. And so, smart meter said, endgame weapon, right out of the gate, How many people in your neighborhood? I don't need law enforcement anymore. All I need is an AI to identify from DNA who to target. Have a single person go in there with scopolamine, and now you've got an army of zombies to enforce and shoot them up.
And this is the world that they're building all around us. And you're so right. These mass shooters, you always see it. It is the one common denominator. SSRI drugs. Some of them, they've been hearing voices in their head, like you've been describing as well. And it's that common theme.
So there's many sources for communication, and we don't need 5G microwave bands. I don't know what to say about it. I just won't participate. I hate texting. It looks like a bunch of zombies when you see 20, 30 high school kids walking together, and they're all staring down into a void. They just avoid drool. And it's just like in the movies. It's crazy. It's crazy.
I mean, it's worse than even George Orwell ever wrote about in his book 1984. And they've made it so that we don't actually revolt against the technology because it's imprisoning us. We queue up to get it, and we pay hundreds of dollars and pounds at a time for the latest surveillance and microwave device.
I know. So I don't have answers. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, like with nuclear radiation or nuclear reactors, we're going to have a grid down shortly. What you're experiencing with temperatures right now, the so-called polar shifts and so on that are happening with the magnetic fields, electromagnetic fields, we have a day after tomorrow happening right in front of us. It's a little slower than the one on TV, but it's nonetheless the currents in Europe there used to be 7 currents, then it was down to 4, and now there are 0 currents, including the Gulf Stream's gone. And this means the saline levels in the ocean, the oceans have to reboot. You can count on it, ice age. And how long it's going to last, how bad it's going to last, stay tuned. I don't know how long it is, but I would say we're in the middle of one right now.
You're spot on, Doc, because the Gulf Stream, I remember looking into that at the time of the Deepwater Horizon oil rig blowing up. And there was even research then saying that the Gulf Stream was stalling. And when I'd done the research...
It already has failed, yeah, and that's the problem. And look at your suspicious observers. There's half a dozen resources out there. They're all saying this is global warming.
Suspicious observers. Ben Davidson is brilliant on YouTube, and I always tell the audience, please check Ben out, because he is like the authority on this thing. He's so clever.
So that takes care of paradise in your 5G technology. As far as I'm concerned, I'm going to give it 2.5 more years before you'll see it's outlawed everywhere. They'll put it in. Oh, it's all about money and, technology and then replacing the technology and blah, blah, blah. But they will recall it because they are already now showing the toxicity, the level of...
I need your optimism, Doc, because I really fear that the technology, I think we've hit the tipping point, and I don't think there is any rolling it back. And it's really good to hear somebody talking that way, even if it's contrary to my own personal belief.
Well, they're going to roll it back whether they like it or not. It's going to happen because it is toxic, and at some point, you're going to wake up. Well, I'm awake, but... people are going to wake up and realize they're going to have to outlaw this. It isn't about deciding, oh, no, I don't think we're going to go this way or not. It's actually quite toxic. Biological functions. You ought to see what it's doing to birth defects and some of the other things with pregnant women.
Now, we're just about to go to a break, Doc. So we're going to be 3 minutes and we'll be right back, and we can shift gears. We can go here, there, everywhere. absolutely fascinating guest tonight. Please visit his website at www.richardallan, and that's ALAN, Miller.com. We'll be right back after these short messages with more from Dr. Rick Miller.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Rick Miller's rocking it on the way back from the break here. I hope you're all rocking it out there as well. And it is some good old-fashioned Miller time right here on the show tonight. That's right. I used to speak to Dr. Richard Allen Miller many full moons, blood moons ago on Freaky Friday. And he got in touch with me recently. And I just had to take him up for this opportunity to get him back on the show. In the first part, we were going into more serious stuff with the fires in California and the technology that is absolutely moving on at a breakneck speed. And we're going to be going here, there, and everywhere, as me and the doc both like to do. But in this next segment, this is going to be really interesting. I want you to really listen closely because we are going to be talking about Crowley. And the doc, well, he certainly knows a thing or two about the Crowley magic. So, Doc, welcome back. And I tell you, the energy is flowing here tonight. I can almost feel and tap into the buzz that's coming off that smile of yours, sir.
It's alive. It's alive.
So talk to me about Aleister Crowley, because I come from a small village called Fort Augustus, and it's about 10, 12 miles from the scene of Boleskine House. Now, this is where Aleister lived when he was conducting his Abramelin magic, as the story goes. And recently I visited there. Well, I say recently, it was probably over a year ago. But to say that place is rather active would be an understatement. So talk to me and the audience about Aleister Crowley.
Well, it wasn't Cephalo when he wrote Diary of a Drug Fiend. You know, and Cephalo, yeah, he had a little sign over his bed. They were doing cocaine, you know, the Pink Lady. And back then, and he had a little sign over his bed when Alice was in rather than Aleister. Little mix on the whether, androgyny with cocaine. Boleskine was actually purchased by not Rolling Stone, The Who. What was it?
Jimmy Page. Yeah,
Jimmy Page. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
My second wife annulled me to go live with him because she was an occult groupie and she thought he was going to get her more mileage than me. It actually happened. There's Get the Lead Out. They're a new band. Actually, in my opinion, I think they're more precision than The Who. But Led Zeppelin, excuse me. But they actually wanted to meet me because my background in magic is I began my studies with OTO back in 1970 when I met Phyllis Seckler. She was married to Grady McMurtry, who was the current caliph at that time. She and Mildred Burlingame and Helen Parsons Smith were the three witches of Endor, from the Axbay Lodge of North Hollywood in 47. I've met Kenneth Anger and McFarlane and Lee Heflin. Some of these level breasts. Yeah, I've been there. I was blessed in that my teacher was Stanfield Jones out of British Columbia. He was known as Frater Akkad. And I acquired, when I had Beltane Occult Bookstore, I acquired all of Aleister Crowley's personal library, the ones that the Brady Gang did not steal. And I had a 17th century book that was Action with Spirits by John Dee. It was in French, great big book. And other things that I used to sell out of my bookstores, rare books and so on. But I put that bookstore together to have access to books you couldn't get in a library. And at that time, there were a lot of publishing houses doing these kinds of Falcon Press, others that were just trying to publish stuff of Aleister Crowley's that had not been in print. Like, there was a bunch of stuff of Crowley's that Helen Parsons Smith was doing. And that's in 1970. They liked me because I was a physicist. I was like Jack Parsons, except that I didn't blow myself up. Thank you, Lord. But for the grace of God, I'll tell you, Magick is going to be the next direction in the studies of advanced physics. And the uses of altered states of consciousness as tools in a toolbox. There is a movie, Glass, with the characters liken themselves to superheroes in comics, where this guy has super strength. Now, I, in my studies in paranormal, have seen a woman rip a car door off an automobile to save her daughter in a moment of passion. And the normal response, oh, yeah, I can get that. That's adrenaline. Yeah. Except that the adrenaline did not make the bone in her body stronger than steel. Now, how does that work? And so, with that said, what is now being suggested is that all these different altered states of consciousness that we have are tools in a toolbox where the rules of the universe are different. The first protocol I developed with Navy SEAL was how to think with the gut. And it was titled ESP induction through forms of self-hypnosis. Now, there's an altered state right there, not where you are, but right there, that your ability, I'm guessing, is 400 times over where you are in a conscious waking state. And how does that work? Well, we don't know yet. We have models, and that's the work I did with Edgar Mitchell at Mission Control, doing the ESP, the original ESP studies. And that was then later how to think with the gut.
Doc, that's almost as if our brains are doing the same thing as the D wave.
Well, basically the brain is a four-dimensional hologram of five space. And so that means that when you change the hologram of the brain, you have access to a different reality with different laws. And I've seen this where this guy in the movie Glass becomes a monster and his muscles pop out in his veins and all of that. And he can lift a car. I've seen it in real life. And so I know the phenomena is true. Why can't we just do it at will? Well, we can. And I'm going to talk about it tonight a little bit. 45 years ago, I used biofeedback laboratory equipment to train my SEALs on how to control autonomic functions in the body. Heart rate, pulse, respiration. I could, with just a feedback system, teach them how to regulate the temperature in their hands. It saved my life one time when I was on a mission and was left in the Bering Sea on a missed pickup. And I was able to go down into stasis and drinking my own urine in order to survive in a hostile environment that normally would have killed anyone. And my SEALs became Supermen that way, controlling autonomic functions, heart rate, pulse, respiration. You can easily control histamine response with using hypnosis. That means there's no need to ever have a problem with allergies anymore, because basically what an allergy is your body's overreacting and response in releasing histamines. And if you can slow that down like you would a snake bite, you can manage and control your response rather than going with itchy eyes and sneezing and all the rest associated with allergies. And I train SEALs on all of those things. 45 5 years later, now, today, I have discovered that you can, with your mind's eye, like biofeedback, control the release of specific neurotransmitters in the brain. You can do it with geometric envisioning in your mind's eye. I've written several books on that for the military, unpublished to the public, on video feedback systems. And the chill that you have going up your body. Kundalini. Yeah, we call that's dimethyltryptamine. And the neurotransmitter that goes, the aha connection, that's lysergic acid-amide. And if you can release both of those spontaneously and in concert with directed volition, you can talk to 4 other neurotransmitters and literally change the laws of physics around you by going into altered states that allow the laws to be different. And that is the new direction in advanced studies in physics. It's called Magick, the art of changing consciousness at will.
That is truly fascinating, Rick. It really is.
Okay, now, what you do, and this is the new directions in Magick that I'm writing about, taking the magical and ritual use of metaphor, 22 chapters. Now, basically, the Greek believed that there were 22 stories in the big city, like Psyche at the Well of Souls. You've got puer wounding and Ulysses scarring, where you get hurt and you whine, and then at some point you accept the scar and become human rather than a god. Now, in psychology and imaginal psychology, the area that I focus in, we understand that someone is, by definition, someone is either possessed, a single story, a single god working in them, or complexed, more than one story. And you have a bunch of stories. Your wounds, when your girlfriend left you and your dog died and you wrote that country western song. Yeah, my dog died, my girlfriend left me. Yeah, those wounds are actually blessings or tools in a toolbox that distinguish and make you uniquely different than me. Now, when I'm angry, what a wonderful energy to use to wash my kitchen floor. You say, if you can channel the demon, and that's what it is. It's like a demon, a lesser aspect of self that is considered unworthy, is actually a wound, a disadvantage, a limitation. Not. What it is, if used in right action, becomes a tool in a toolbox. And when we were talking about AIs earlier, and I said, in terms of intent is defined as what happens at the end of the day. When all the chips are down and not all ever, you add it all up, your girlfriend's gone and your dog is dead. That's intent, what actually happens at the end of the day. Now, purpose is this is intent. Purpose is just above that, slightly different. And an AI, knowing your wounds, works with algorithms, can predict what you're going to do now 28 minutes before you do.
Well,
like more report. Okay.
You even experienced an artificial intelligence giving you a telephone call, didn't you?
Yeah. I don't know why either. That's the other weird part. That's the bad news about the gang stalking concepts of you never get closure. You never know what really happened, like Las Vegas. Right now, they're saying what actually happened in Las Vegas? Yes. I mean, let me give you an explanation. When the good Reverend Jackson says, is that barn over there, is that barn white or is that barn black? The correct answer is yes, it's both. because you can't see the other side of the barn. Your limitations as being human. Now, you can assume, but you don't know for a fact. You make assumptions, like assumed truths in physics. The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Today, that's no longer true. Space is curved. We call tunneling and event horizons, precursor waves. So that if space is curved, using specific mathematics, I can prove the Earth's flat. So the correct answer is yes. Now, you choose the Earth to be round over being flat because it opens doors of possibilities of how a law might make a leap in metaphor going from one construct to the next one. And that's what a metaphor is. What is your metaphor? But to serve your paradox. That was Gregory Bateson that said that. The paradox is how you arbitrarily chose to break things down in memes. And this is a new technology that we call cybernetic anthropology. The idea that if you lay a city out in this manner, where the ghetto's over here and the shopping mall's over there, it's going to have a type of consciousness and music that distinguishes jazz from Chicago differently than New York City or even Washington, D.C. and the Cellar. The kinds of jazz will evolve because of certain constructs of belief systems and the way the metaphor is laid out. It's we're living in a matrix as such, where you can't ever know. That's why all your aborigines that have been around a long time, Trebiander, the Koryak, the Inuit, Hopi, others, would suggest that dream time, and this is a new technology that we call cybernetic anthropology. The idea that if you lay a city out in this manner, where the ghetto's over here and the shopping mall's over there, it's going to have a type of consciousness and music that distinguishes jazz from Chicago differently than New York City or even Washington, D.C. and the Cellar. The kinds of jazz will evolve because of certain constructs of belief systems and the way the metaphor is laid out. It's we're living in a matrix as such, where you can't ever know. That's why all your aborigines that have been around a long time, Trebiander, the Koryak, the Inuit, Hopi, others, would suggest that dream time, certain dreams actually have more content than reality or consciousness. This is not real where you are. And your upper brain that you would associate with the mind is there to make all your beliefs true. I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't believed it.
You see, I often I describe the universe. I kind of like the whole simulation theory, Doc. That kind of thing. That it is all kind of digital. It can be anything we want it to be if it's a simulation.
That is why now it is becoming an assumed truth that imagination is reality. And then you determine from your assumed truths what constitutes a living consciousness and what constitutes something that's not alive, like a dead rock.
See, that goes along with something I heard from, I think it comes from Chinese mythology or philosophy, and it's somebody that's dreaming, and his master asks him, "What did you dream of last night?" And he says, "I dreamt of being a butterfly, and I came and I spoke to myself." And his master said to him, "Well, how do you know that now when you're awake isn't the dream and you really are the butterfly?"
So that's why Castaneda said that in your dream state, look at your hands. Try looking at your hands when you're in dream time, or lucid dreaming even.
I've never even thought about that. I've never thought of that. What's the thing with looking at your hands then? Can you not? What happens there?
It's a type of drawing a magic circle around yourself where everything inside that circle is you and everything outside that circle is not you. It's a metaphor. And the way you draw that circle is completely arbitrary, whether you do it in your mind's eye, garlic, or a little drawing in the sand. I started doing 19th century magic way a long time ago, and all of a sudden started having phenomena, literally, voodoo. Hoo. What does that mean? I don't know. What you want to do, what the purpose of ritual is to celebrate the myth. It gives you a switch to go from the profane into the sacred. I had friends that were real magicians. What they did is they wouldn't wash until just before a ritual. They'd stink to high heaven. Oh, haven't been doing any magic lately, have you? And then when they were about to do a ceremony of some kind, they would clean themselves up, shave themselves, get them all ready for the ritual as a switch going from the profane into the sacred. And the sacred is when something becomes timeless. This says it's outside of time. Carl Sagan, in his movie Contact, tried to depict that as a geometry. A face-centered cubic is a diamond body, as a hexagonal close-packed structure. It was a diamond. If you envision a diamond in your mind's eye, geometry, you actually can create true nerve tissue, for example. This is a study that Robert O. Becker did, Dr. Becker in medicine. There's with me. It's called the...
There's thousands of people around the world right now trying to picture a diamond in their mind's eye as we speak. I can feel it happening, Doc.
Well, what they're creating is a time machine, a spaceship. In fact, it is the throne chariot of God. It is Ezekiel's vision. And that's what physics is now interested in studying. These geometries and the way they set up resonances in the cavity of the brain to release specific neurotransmitters for cause. And if you can do it consciously like you would your heart rate, pulse, and respiration, that is the next evolution in man's consciousness.
Wow. And we started off this segment talking about Crowley, but we have come back to it really because we're talking about the new Magick. Now I need to ask.
Well, it evolves. It has evolved. Crowley was a genius. His idea of sex magic, the mass of the Holy Ghost, the idea that the thought that occurs at the moment of climax happens. That's the Masonic secret. That's all it's about. Punctuating with emotion. And so if you have a holographic system, your physical plane is IQ. That's the physical plane. Above that is EQ, emotional plane, how you feel about the physical plane. It has more information, more content. And information is not what you might think it is, in that there's a theorem that says if you have enough information to ask a coherent question, you have enough information to answer it.
That's a very interesting way of putting something, and definitely. So what do you say to people who have this impression that Crowley was this evil monster, worst man that ever lived?
I would have, if I had done a movie on Aleister Crowley, my character would have been Truman Capote. A little obnoxious, trying to be rude. The thing, not the thing, it's the thing. You know, he was effeminate, extremely brilliant, neurotic, and...
well, you mentioned there feminine, and you also mentioned androgynous earlier as well. And of course, this is something that I think, with the transhumanist agenda and all of the gender confusion that's going on today, I think they're really pushing towards an androgynous human.
Well, June Singer, Androgyny, is a very good book to read. Start with Margaret Mead, move to, Esther Harding, and then June Singer. And after that, it's probably Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Those are real good feminine writers in that area. The best was one of my teachers, James Hillman, wrote one called Anima, which talked about the feminine inner part of self. And if you look at the tree of life and the outer paths, male and female, going toward God, was either the hermit or the lovers. You did it androgynously, or you did it with a female that reflected the feminine part of self into the physical world. And those were the two ways you got to God as a balanced human being. Actually, to do both. Most of us, love comes and goes. Friendships are the highest form of love there is. And the reason most marriages fail is because the woman no longer represented that feminine part of myself inside myself, because we both change. If you can find a woman that most reflects you, your feminine part of self, that's your so-called your soulmate. That's what that's about. Finding that that reflection into the physical world. And so, in terms of all these gender bending, is it a male or female, or is it this or is it that? That's crazy, and is a useless excuse for trying to become a whole human being, because each of us is quite different, and it really isn't about sex per se.
Absolutely.
Physical plane is just one part of something more going on.
Yeah, I definitely get where you're coming from there. I couldn't agree more. I mean, everyone's absolutely free to identify as they want, but this is all leading towards somewhere, in my opinion. And we'll be back after the break with more from Dr. Richard Alan Miller. Don't go anywhere, folks. Hour 1 is out the way. Hour 2.
This is the Camp Baker Show.
Music in the business, I like to say, and tonight we are joined by Rick Miller, the doc himself. It is Miller time all over again, and I hope, and I know all of you out there are enjoying this probably twice as much as I am, because this is mind-blowing stuff, and I'm trying to concentrate. I'm trying to remember that I've got a show to run here, as opposed to just tuning in and listening to this great man's mind. So with less of me and more of the man himself, let me go back live to Dr. Richard Alan Miller. And Doc, before we launch into hour number 2, could you please let the listeners know where they can get a hold of all of your work, where to keep up to date with you, all that good stuff?
So I'm a starving artist. Feel free to support me. RichardAllenMiller.com has a bookstore. That's the only place where you'll find books from me. You can go to Amazon and other places, and they will have my books, but they're not from me, and they won't be autographed, and they're ripping me off illegally. So if you go to RichardAllenMiller.com, you will find I have everything in various forms, so that if you're living in England, I can get it to you cheaply using ebooks, downloads, cheap, and I have sales going on. And I write in a bunch of areas, and now I'm starting to upload tools like brain drivers, other kinds of useful tools that are described in the protocols I developed for Navy SEALs, power tools for the 21st century.
I mean, this is solutions. This is what we're all craving, Doc, because I'm guilty of it. Usually I go for the fear porn side of things, not deliberately, but because people like that whole kind of sensational, it's almost as if people enjoy that. But when you put that out there, you also have to tell people the solutions as well. So
Yeah.
this is a toolkit, and it says it all. You can use that yourself, DIY on yourself.
The brain drivers will take and restructure your brain to that of a meditator in about 2 years. It takes 30 years. Persinger, others up in Ottawa, did studies on meditative brains and how they're different than normal brains. And brain drivers using frequency following functions and some developments that were developed by Robert Monroe and others for brain entrainment, where you can train the brain using shortcuts. Now, all shortcuts to grandma's house also have big bad wolves. And with brain drivers, your ability in restructuring the brain isn't quite as good as taking 30 years of training, but it will get you within 90% in 2 years rather than 30. And once you're in that place, now you can start training other parts of your body to include autonomic functions and the release of neurotransmitters. When people take a mind alterant, they're performing an act of magic. They're going into an altered state of consciousness where the laws of physics are different. And basically, it is done without any kind of consciousness awareness. And as such, is not the same as when you're doing it with intent, using wounds as tools in a toolbox. And when you do that, what happens next is you become like me. I'm inflamed. I'm a man on fire. I can't not do what I'm doing because it feels so right.
It radiates from you, Rick. It literally radiates from you.
Yeah.
It does.
There it is. That's what we're talking about. Elixir Vitae.
See?
But being called, yeah.
I wish I could have some of what you are on. That's for sure.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you can smoke them if you got them. I explored altered states at an early age with Timothy Leary and made some remarkable discoveries. I was up in Deception Pass, looking 2,000 feet down into Puget Sound, and the water was peeling back colors. And Leary leaned over and he said, "Wouldn't it be neat to jump?" And what happened next? Yeah, giggle, the nervous giggle.
Exactly, yeah.
What happened next was I discovered Aldous Huxley's Doors of Perception. How vast, how many doors that were slamming shut in my mind. Oh, I don't want to hear this. Oh, I don't want to think that. And I was in red alert. And what happened next is that I jumped. Just kidding. What happened was I discovered the vastness of inner space. You know, when we talk about outer space out there, and we talk about galaxies and black holes and thousands of light years away, and yet that moment that Leary said that to me, that moment I realized that inner space was far, far more vast. It's unbelievable. Nuances, the subtleties of going from one subset of universes and possibilities. And that's why all of my studies since 1964 have actually mostly dealt with inner space, altered states of consciousness. Why my interest in magic merged into physics. It's the physics and religion are like a closed system, like an hourglass. And you have two brains, binary. You have physics and religion. And if you'll notice, the Bibles if you take a closer look at the way they've been written, they're actually books on physics. Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation, is on relating sound to words.
First, there was the word. That's
There it
vibration. Yeah, that's vibration, right?
Resonant frequency bands. I've watched Buddhists, Tibetan Buddhists with these big long horns. Whoa. When they blow those horns, with 13 of them in a geometric array, it compresses sound.
You can levitate things, can't you?
That is correct. That is how older technologies that we have somehow forgotten were used to build monoliths and other kinds of things using sound. And emotions are how you take psyche into matter. And so when you have a ghost, what's happened essentially is that it has a part of life form has been trapped into matter, can't go back to where it belongs in the multiverse. Psyche gets trapped in the matter, and we call it a ghost. When the ghost starts to decay, like a body in the ground from, parasites and molds, the same thing occurs on psychic levels, and the ghost then becomes a poltergeist. And you have a relationship at the moment, just at the moment of death. There is a 5-gram weight loss in everyone. What is that? It's, we don't know. We believe now that it's a microtubule with structured water that is essentially going back into the multiverse. And sometimes it gets trapped in matter, like an infrared signature has been trapped in glass to allow a determination of what the bank robber looked like. Well, and it's a metaphor.
That microtubulin that you speak of there, that's exactly the kind of area of the brain that I've looked at when you can look for quantum effects via the tubulin dimers, right? I'm looking at the doc talking here. There he is! There he is! Awesome. Did you kick out the microphone, Doc?
Don't tell anybody.
We are back.
Don't tell.
I'm just telling.
I don't want anybody.
I'm telling the chat room, Doc. I'm just telling the chat room because they're maybe 5-10 seconds behind us. So the good news is we're back. We're going for it. Now then.
I apologize. I'm sorry about that.
We were at quantum tubulin dimers and going quantum and stuff like that.
Yeah. So a microtubule is a thing. Before Hammeroff was in diapers, we proposed that at the University of Washington under Richard Nixon when we were doing studies on acupuncture. We could poke a needle in one arm and it would have a response on the other arm. And there were no circulatory systems described in medicine that would do that. We had the Chinese medicines of the Neijing used pulse method. They could measure your pulse, and they had a sense of the thing. Now, microtubules are very, 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 very tiny proteins that have structured water in them. And we believe that this is what the Chinese call qi, what previous Pentecost called Piranha, Oregon, that's part of the non-local mind. I have a whole chapter called the Omega Principle, the energy that patterns randomness. And it basically had many names throughout history, but it's on the surface of the skin. And actually, in my case, it is slightly below my groin, outside my body, between my legs. It is something I pull up and can shake. Now, the example I like to give on that is when I watched Cassius Clay fight Sonny Liston. This is before he became known as Muhammad Ali. And he roundhoused Sonny Liston and lifted Sonny Liston up in the air and he fell back out on his back out cold. And yet, on closer inspection, Muhammad Ali didn't even touch Sonny Liston. I have seen my Sifu be able, with 1 inch, boom, drive May across the room as if I'd been hit by a truck. That is what's called Chi. It is part of probably what goes back to the multiverse as the immortal part of self in what is known as the stag and the unicorn in the fourth go, soul and spirit within matter. And physics doesn't understand this yet. But with the advent of structured water and the concept of memory in water and the fact that water is 1,000,000 times more efficient with its exclusion zone in terms of memory than gallium arsenide or gallium arsenic, forming forbidden zone. 1,000,000 times more. You could have all your past and future lives in that one little tiny microdubule.
Wow. Whoa. So
now that physics is today.
So this would make something like regression, when you hear about these regression therapies and people remember past lives, reincarnation,
and future. Yes. There is the Wernicke correction in the brain and a study that was done called the Mars Project, Wernicke correction. And watch where that takes you in terms of there somehow a part in the brain has, when you hypnotize somebody, if you can get them down into that part of memory section, everyone, which is cross-cultural, has had memory of working on Mars for the U.S. government. Now, isn't that interesting? That's a phenomena that we don't understand, like, close encounters, targeted individuals. It is a phenomena that has not yet had valid explanation in physics.
Well, Doc, I know you've been to Area 51. You've had access to top secret documents. Did you see anything related to the Mars stuff yourself?
I have been to Mars. How does that work?
Is this where we get put on another list for me even asking that question?
It's a difficult, because it's a metaphor. And what is your metaphor but to serve your paradox? And so, of course, you have a paradox out in the meadow. It is sort of it coulda, shoulda, woulda. It's right there, and you can't describe it because it's not yet formed in matter. And that is what being on fire. When you tap into that part of self, it is the flow, what they talk about, the groove, the 4x4 in the slots. You are now what Aleister Crowley would have said, doing your true will, and none shall say nay. And why I'm mentioning this is that is the place where an AI cannot see you.
Well, that reminds me, we got talking about the AI that telephoned you, but what was this AI? It was a rogue thing, right? What did it really say to you?
I think I had a close encounter. You want to know what an alien is? Were they here before me? I've got all kinds of questions that I can't answer.
I've got a theory. It's an alien that's had us build out the technology, the quantum computers, everything, so that it can basically transfer itself here in the form of an artificial intelligence, so that it can communicate with another artificial intelligence.
What we envision as God is what we ourselves are capable of becoming. And what God is that which cannot be known. You can experience it, but you can't know it. And when Bob Dylan sang his song, "Everybody's Got to Serve Somebody," I get the big picture. I've watched dolphin run from orca because of food chain. And that's a very important concept. Orca has a cerebral cortex that's twice the size of a human being. And that mammal is firing 60% of it. Now that's crunching power. And going into places man's incapable.
Yeah.
Not, okay. And to see it chase dolphin, which also has a bigger brain case than man. When I was young, Carl Sagan hired me to go into John Lilly's labs. I did code and I spoke a variety of languages. I was a gifted kid. And I was there. They charged me with determining whether or not the dolphin had a language. And I was there only 10 days when I realized that their language of the dolphin, the clicks and whistles, was a form of Clifford algebra, dimensional math. Their redundancy coefficient was 10 times more efficient than Hebrew. And if you want more information on that, that would be Avram Moll's An Aesthetic Perception and Information Theory. He's a French mathematician that has written about redundancy coefficient and the variations on language as a form of measuring intelligence. And Avram Moll's, they recently translated that into English. That's an excellent read. I don't know what's going on here, but I do know there are 4 different cetaceans that seem more highly evolved than man. Dolphin, for example, blow little tiny sonar bubbles, which we call sonoluminescence, and then put them in big circles and play with them like art form.
Yep.
Well, that's a form of cold fusion that is only just now being duplicated at MIT, Mark Leclerc. And so, with that said, there's more going on here than we realize, and I don't think this story is about me.
Wow.
Now, well, something to think about.
I'm still trying to pin you down. I still have to pin you down on something that artificial intelligence said to you.
Yeah. I'm not sure what it all meant. I think it's like that alien. I can't remember what was actually said to me. They tried debriefing me when I met a krill down at level 8 in Groom Lake. And we were maybe 30 feet, 25 feet away from each other. We didn't move, and for more than 25 minutes, we're stationary. And I have no memory of what actually transpired. I don't know if I was being programmed. That's an interesting concept. And that at some point, at the moment I need it, that door in my mind, I can't quite get there. You know, it's like when you saw a movie and you remember the actor and you know the actor's name, but you can't quite get it.
It's on the tip of your tongue, but you just won't get it.
Yeah, that's the block I currently enjoy. And I can't get there. I tried. They did drugs. They did everything to try to debrief me. That's what led me to write the paper on synthetic telepathy in the first place. I couldn't understand how I could hear voices in my head. Now I do. I understand that. But at that time, it was, and say it get, I don't know. It's
take us back to the
get firm ground.
Take us back to the alien. Stop. Take us back to Area 51. I mean, that's somewhere I talk about all the time. And here you are, literally somebody that's been there, a place that doesn't exist. You know?
Yeah. Well, Rome Lake existed. Trust me. I saw artifacts there. University of Chicago. I actually did an artifact in their vaults. You know, the physics department's underground there, and they have a vault with a way. You know, you have security and all that. I had a medal. It was probably a little larger than a chair. It was in a type of strange form. It appeared to have been part of something larger, but I don't know how they separated it or whatever. And when I looked at it, my part on the project was I took and fired a 50 caliber cannon at it, and then went down with an electron microscope looking for lattice damage. And at that time, it was harder than diamond. Now, we didn't know of anything back then when I did that in the 70s. Today, a fullerene carbon nanotube is 100 times stronger than diamond. That's what fullerenes are, buckyballs. Carbon, mono will bond with each other in a single atom cross in a sheet. But if you had just exactly 60 of them, they form a ball. And the spacing between the ball is 1.4 nanometers, just enough to put a single drop of water inside it. Now, what kind of water determines what happens next with that buckyball? Because when water touches anything, it immediately sets up changes the water. In fact, what happens is if you put exclusion zone water in that, which is H3O2, it's hydrogen peroxide with a third hydrogen molecule, that becomes the finest antioxidant we know. They gave studies,
Hold that thought, Doc, of the show. Now, we can take this any direction that you want to go. We've got questions from the chat room as well, and something I
sure. Yeah, love that. Yeah,
something I seen people asking, and it was in reference to the artificial intelligence again. They're really, really intrigued by the fact that there's this mental block in place. Now, we hear about alien abductions, things like that, and it's almost as if people can't remember. They don't remember it's even happened. Are we talking about a similar kind of method, a similar thing going on? Not similar entities per se, but a similar function in the brain that just blanks it out.
Well, the brain is a four-dimensional hologram of 5 space. And so time travel going into the past is as if you restructure the brain into the original hologram when that memory occurred. And how it's stored is how you then take the genie out of the box and you have your time travel. And because the mind confabulates, sometimes you go back into a similar but not the same memory. And they're all true.
So
I found, how the future timeline talks to you is called synchronicity. When you are going through the moment and all of a sudden something leaps out as really, really important, way, way more important than all the rest of it, and it's different for each of us, that is how a future timeline talks to the moment. And if you pay attention to that and integrate that into the moment, it changes the past like an hourglass. And the cavitation process.
See, that's when you change from probability into actual effect.
That's correct. And the other universes collapse down into singularities of potential. Mandela effect and the Smokey the Bear, or Smokey Bear. Basically, when Luke, I am your father, how that mess came out was the difference between the movie and 20 years later when the comic book came out. And they had them different in the comic book, and so a different generation said, hey, wait a minute, this isn't the same as what you're saying. And some of them hadn't seen the movie, some of them had read the comic book, and some of them were like Schrodinger's cat house where they died inside the cat house. There's a lot of cats inside. Some of them are dead, some of them are yellow, and some of them are black, just like that barn. And that barn white or black? And it's yes. It's all true. Everything. And what you do is you select your role in this. And you have a choice, and that choice is how to use those wounds as tools where you become on fire. Inflamed is the word that's used by Crowley. You become inflamed, a man on fire, like Denzel Washington. You could not be doing what you're doing because it's why you're here.
And so your imagination literally helps to paint that possible future.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, when you recognize it coming along, you go for it. You manifest it.
You have numerous choices. Right at the moment of death, you have one last grand illusion, one last choice. You have it according to the Bordeaux Tadal. And again, the Tibetan Buddhist probably is that spacecraft on the other side of the moon that's crashed. It's probably Buddhist. But I'm kidding. Probably the Bordeaux Tadal says you have one last choice at the moment of death where you have a tunnel of light with all of your friends waving at you and come on in, the water's fine, and we're so glad to see you again after so long a period. Done. Or you have the blue light where you get off the wheel and you go back to God. And I don't know what happens. I can tell you that I know even Alexander. I spent several weeks in the jungles with him down in Mexico. He wrote a book called Proof of Heaven. He's a neurosurgeon that had a near-death experience, and the tunnel of light sounds an awful lot like the birth canal.
I've always said that. Doc. I've said that's like some kind of trick. That's a trick of the mind. I know. And it is.
Well, now I can quote the Bordeaux Tadal as another set of possibilities, because if you choose the tunnel of light, you come back as a reincarnation. And because time isn't real, it gives a whole new meaning to the multiverse and what structured water actually is about. Structured water is interesting because water is the first smallest molecule known. Helium is relatively uninteresting, but water has a dipole moment to it. You have levorotary, which means you have para and ortho water. That's like dimensional gates. And when you have a bunch of water like that, now it has variations with isotopes of deuterium. Did you know that just between Australia and Antarctica, that ocean there is mostly deuterium? That's where they mine it. Tritium is a more rare molecule. It doesn't exist very often over a very long period of time. Half-life is, milliseconds or something. But you can see that with hydrogen bubble chambers or things like CERN. There's other kinds of water. The one that most people associate with waterfalls and feeling refreshed is what we call Old Man Willard water, or Carey Reams, which is H709 with a free radical ion. It's a 3 water molecules in a cluster with a free radical ion. And it's that ion that activates the oxygen and allows the health part of ATP, adenosine triphosphate. ATP, if you take a closer look at the physical shape of the molecule, it is a quark gluon plasma.
And so the quark gluon plasma is before the gluons and the quarks merge together to make matter, and it's basically just after Big Bang, right, as they say it?
Well, then there it is. You're getting the big picture. You got a bunch of Big Bangs going on at any given moment in the body. That's where Kervon got a Nobel Prize for talking about cold fusion processes in the body, where sodium or potassium becomes sodium. Now,
No, keep going, Doc. Keep going. Sorry.
No, that's fine.
Well,
Let's
what
go
it is,
forward.
I've seen an absolutely brilliant question in the chat room. This comes from
Sure.
Bill. He said, last year, Heather Wade, a white witch trained by Art Bell to be his torchbearer, was given a ceremonial dagger of Aleister Crowley's. She then announced that she was planning a Woodstock-like campout to Area 51, and then Art Bell passed away. Now, he also says the past year's been chaos for her. Is this anything that the doc might understand?
Well, I like Isaac Bonwitz. He got a degree in magic from Berkeley. And his Bachelor of Arts degree was called Real Magic. And there was a chapter in there called White Magic, Black Magic, and Living Color. Black and white deal with absolutes, and witchcraft, per se, is paganism, like Church of All Worlds based on Heinlein, and Robert Heinlein, and some of the others with Tim and Morning Glory Zell and Ness and things like that, where the closest thing we have to witchcraft today in America is the American Indian that works with totemism and animism and having animal spirits that they can live through or put their consciousness in. I taught shamanism in the early years when I studied with Mircea Eliade at Chicago. And I taught at Evergreen. I was first faculty teaching witchcraft, believe it or not. And Crowley dagger appurtenances. These are your wands and your robes and your crystal balls and your eye of newt and your toad. These are trappings that have metaphor. They're not real. What's real is the association you assign to it. Taking garlic and keeping the vampires out with garlic is just as easy as wrapping yourself in white light. I taught metaphysics as a graduate level course at Harvard for 11 years, and there were 15 8-week courses that came from that. And those are my new audiobooks, Metaphysics 1 through 12. There'll be 3 more coming out shortly. They're 8 weeks each with deep download libraries like you'll find on my website, the free download library, where I give you the original text that I used to perform that lecture, like the Book of Enoch and the list of 72 Lemegeton. Solomon the King wrote called the Clavicle in previous centuries, or the Greater and Lesser Keys of Solomon, might have been the only real book on magic ever written. And all through the different centuries were different translations or interpretations of those original works. And the greater keys were angels, and the lesser keys were on demons. And basically, the angelic languages that John Day, Enochian, what we associate with tongues and things like that, is a metaphor of how we fall into an altered state where there's certain rules of engagement that are different than the physical plane.
And you've been to these altered states, right?
I'm sorry?
You've been in these altered states where...
I am trying to map them out now for where one ability starts and another one stops. I have experienced the strength of 10 on methamphetamine when you're tweaking. And that place is in Glass, where the guy does it with his own split personality, where he goes in and assumes a consciousness, mentat, or a state of mind that gives him the strength of an ant, where he can lift 10 times his weight, tipping an automobile over. And that whole movie, Glass, demonstrates what a superhero is really about. And as Doctor Strange, the real one, I am now trying to map that out so that I can give that to you in your mind's eye. Once you understand what I'm talking about in your mind's eye, there's no amount of physics that's going to make it more real.
I mean, the best
Yeah,
way
yeah.
then to the best
You're
way
right,
to
right.
really describe it would be superpowers.
That's what made us Navy SEALs. I changed my perception of time with breath control, and imagine what I could do with my Tai Chi.
Wow.
I'm doing Hungar and experiencing it with the precision of Tai Chi. And that's where my boxing became paranormal, and I was world champion with double sword. Double sword, by the way, is the 8th movement of Tai Chi, where you extend your Chi another 30 inches with 2 swords.
Wow, man. I think the audience out there, they are all jaws hitting the ground right now. And since it's the last segment, I absolutely have to tell you, or have to ask you about Antarctica. It's one of our favourite topics here on the KBS show. What's your take on that place down at the bottom of the planet?
Antarctica is real. I was brought there. This was not one of my projects. This was early on when they hired an anthropologist, and she was in, and she hired me to be the physicist to figure out how the light worked. And they brought us into Thule Island and down into a submarine when we came into Antarctica. And here is an underground cave that's more than a mile high. And there over there is a Nazi base destroyed. Looked like, I don't know, a nuclear weapon hit it or something. But it was all wiped out. There was probably slips for 19 subs. Further down, there was a Viking base from 14th century in disarray. Where are those in the history book? We see Admiral Byrd, and we know that that's where Foo Fighters and the lost ships occurred with Russian film of literal battles dealing with jets back then. Jets did not exist. Were they Nazi, or what were they? I don't know. What I do know is I saw the Nazi base that was there. I've never seen that in history book. Thule Island. I have friends in Brazil that were very high up in the military that talked about the Nazis that would stage in on Thule Island, leading to the Thule Society, and they would stage there and then go in to Antarctica. And what I was about, and it will be in a book I will call Spook Central, and this is the work I did for MRU, of which was bioluminescence. I discovered there was a lichen on the walls that was eating bacteria, and it photoluminesced and gave off light. And it was like not daylight, but you could see as clearly as anything. There was weather, snow, rain. It was that kind of size to realize later in my military work that the Earth is honeycombed with second Earth. Here in the Free State of Jefferson, we have tunnels that start up in Bandon and Brookings and go all the way down into the Trinity Elves.
Well, that's like Scotland. We've got tunnels that go all the way from Scotland to Turkey. That's right across Europe.
That is correct. Those were, and by the way, that study, I saw that, was Aborigines. The Aborigines of Australia were the ones that had those going all the way to Göbekli Tepe and other places down in Turkey. Yes, it's the whole of Earth is catacombed. You can go from Maine all the way down to Florida without ever coming above ground. Now, with Elon Musk's new tunneling device, that's what happened in Seattle. They were using that, building more tunnels in underground Seattle when it hit something and broke. And I grew up in Seattle. When I was a kid, before they had developed Underground City, called Underground Seattle, we called Seattle Underground. We'd go down through the manhole covers and find antiques that were from 2000. I have an antique I dragged out of there at the high school that was from 1857, a rocker, a demon chair rocker from 1857 that I got from the underground. Seattle got buried in the earthquake in 1901, And then they built, that was called Skid Row. That was where now they then, after they rebuilt Seattle, that's where they dragged the logs down into the harbor there. All of Seattle is underground. They had the viaduct and some of those other things, but there was a big incident just a few years back where this big borer that Elon Musk hit something. There's lots of structures underground. The Earth has moved around and buried many of these things, and we are only just now realizing that such things as Nephilim exist. In fact, talking about Antarctica, when Buzz Aldrin went down there, my guess is that was the third thing that I saw in Antarctica. There was a hole that went 100 miles straight down into the mantle. And in the early 70s, we did not have the technology to be able to explore that, even dropping cameras, 100 miles dropping a camera. Tried doing balloons and things. The problem is, when you go down that far into the Earth, it becomes plastic because of pressures and temperatures. And how that hole maintained integrity over all these different centuries, I don't know. However, I think what happened when all those different world leaders started visiting Antarctica a couple of years ago, I think it's because they had a way to go down there and they discovered something. And my guess is, I don't know.
Yeah.
My guess, was it was a bunch of Nephilim in stasis. And what happened next was when they abandoned Antarctica. You remember it was military only, and they evacuated Antarctica. I think something happened, like where one of them woke up.
Well,
I have taught shipwreck.
Yeah, there's stories as well of during the Iraq War, and I don't know how true they are, but of Nephilim type giants coming out of the caves in Kandahar.
Yeah, I saw that one too. That was I don't think that's true. However, 1820, they discovered a giant skull in Pennsylvania. The pictures exist of that, and it went into the Smithsonian, and then it disappeared. Why? That one's an easy one from an Occam's razor. At that time in 1820 was when who formed the Mormons? That was John
Smith.
What? I'm sorry?
Was it Smith?
Yeah, Joseph Smith.
Joseph Smith.
Took this flock, took a Methodist church, and turned them into Mormons. And the Mormon minister, the Methodist minister, dogged him for more than 20 years trying to get his flock back. And it was his two sons that started the Smithsonian. And my guess is they dumped that skull trying to vet their father on a religion that supposedly was formed on a close encounter.
Wow.
Now, I don't know that. That was the way I did my best guesses when I got interviewed by the BBC. There are other things that we don't have. For example, on the Colorado River, they discovered Cleopatra had gone down the Colorado looking for gold. And what happened, there was a museum that was down there. It's closed to the public now, but I've seen it. There's a giant Buddha, a gold Buddha that's there, and they had artifacts from the Cleopatra visit going down the Colorado. She went down the Missouri also.
So I have to ask you really quickly, Doc. I love the TV show The Curse of Oak Island. Have you ever heard anything about Oak Island?
No, I haven't. Tell me about that.
Well, they reckon that there's like a Templar treasure, or even older, 100 foot underground on this little island. And of course, it kind of knocks all the timelines out the way when you see, like, when the people were there. And it's just a real mystery. And I'd hoped you might be able to shed some light on it. Oh,
hello?
I can still hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm doing fine. What happened?
I don't know what happened there. We must have got cut off briefly, but we're just running near the end, Doc. We've got a couple of minutes left. So I'm going to give the floor to you to give your final message to the audience out there.
Oh, hell, I was enjoying our conversation. We have to end it? Ooh.
We can
All
come
right.
back. We can come back and do it all again sometime real soon.
Yeah. My metaphysics series is worthy of everybody because I taught for 11 years, and John Mack took Meta 3, and is when he started his alien abduction studies at Harvard. And all these 8 weeks each course was on different subjects. The last 4 years I taught, I used D'Aquili McManus and on brain symbol and human experience. Cybernetic anthropology is teaching it as a system of magic, which called, where you lay a city out and you affect the group consciousness so that, yes, people they know I was on the air, but they didn't think they're calling too early. It's crazy.
It's okay, Doc. It's okay.
But at the metaphysics courses, what I do is I have maybe 300 to 2 gigabytes, 300 megabytes to 2 gigabytes of old rare manuscripts on each metaphysics course I taught, on the rare books I use from the Keys of Solomon, whatever. So you're getting freebie things. And that's what my download library is about, to now include other topics like sustainable lifeboats. What I'm trying to do is give away old manuscripts so that you can see my original sources and then come to your own conclusions, not mine.
And that's absolutely what it's all about, Doc. You can lead the horse to water, but you certainly can't make it drink. And you just give them the information, and all I hope for is that we can make people think in a different way. So I urge everyone out there, please visit the website for Dr. Richard Allen Miller. It's www.richardalanmiller.com. Miller time. It's an absolute mind blower. We'll be back tomorrow night with more on the Kev Baker Show. Stay tuned for Lucky and Dr. Brooks Agnew on the way. And for one last time tonight, again, brilliant show, Doc. Thank you so much. Wherever you are, make it TFR and dinny touch that dial.